I'd like to introduce you to our new strategy and vision statement, the Regenerative Railway. Many of you will remember our previous vision statement, which we've called the Sustainable Railway. It's now 11 years ago that we published this. We've got a great deal to celebrate. It's very easy to focus on the big projects that we've delivered, whether it's the trains of new and very much more comfortable carriages, the transformation of Carnarvon from a series of porter cabins to a magnificent new station, or the huge work which has been undertaken at Boston Lodge or at Portmaddock Harbour. But behind that, there's some really very fundamental changes, which are also a fundamental part of this strategy. The first dimension is that we have cleared our long-term debt. When we wrote this, we still had quite substantial debt. The debt had peaked at £1.75 million in 2003, but it still was quite substantial when we published this document. We now have no long-term debt. Beyond that, we have done a great deal with the local community. We know that how important the railway is in generating jobs and activity in the local economy. And we've done a lot more too in terms of our heritage and the heritage again of our whole local community. And that was really celebrated last year with the award of World Heritage Site status to the slate landscape of Northwest Wales, which included our railway. There is a great deal more to be done. The Sustainable Railway has done us really well, and it was well ahead of its time. It was several years after we published that the Welsh Government made the welfare of future generations a key policy objective. But it is time to move on. A lot of those projects we've mentioned have been done, and we need to think again about what our fundamental aims should be. The Sustainable Railway was non-negative. It deliberately avoided damaging things which we should aim to keep. But we want to move now from being non-negative to being positive. In several areas in the economy, particularly in agriculture and in medicine, people have started talking about regenerative. And regenerative means to restore to a better state. And that is now what we are aiming to do for our railway, to make sure we leave the place in a better place for the next generation. How will the regenerative railway be judged? Well, regenerative is just the same as sustainable in that it's going to be judged against its effect on economy, on the community, and on the environment. And the economy is the right place to start, and most particularly our own economy and the railway, because if we aren't viable, we frankly can't do anything else. So, what is our aim here? Well, we've eliminated our long-term debt, but we were put to some difficulty during COVID by the fact that we rely on our overdraft to cover us throughout the first few months of the year. Our aim for the regenerative railway is to cover ourselves by giving ourselves an extra level of cover so that the overdraft becomes very much something we only use as a last resort. And this has also led and been developed into a different form of planning model, our own form of planning model. We expect to cover our annual costs out of our annual receipts, and that is done through an extremely detailed budget. So by the end of the year, we're measuring carefully how much profit we have made and how much we can spend during that winter on the winter programme. For all the projects we're going to talk about here, or you're going to read about, I hope, in the brochures, they are covered through separate funding. And the key rule there is we don't spend money that we don't have. We won't borrow to carry out projects. So we have to make sure we've raised that money through donations or legacies or grants. We've already covered our effect on the economy of Gwynedd, but there is also some very important effects on the culture of Gwynedd, where our involvement and inclusion in the World Heritage Site has celebrated a tremendous achievement of Gwynedd people over the years. And we've always been conscious on this railway about the environment. It's 50 years ago now that Dan Wilson got highly commended for a poster in the New Statesman magazine highlighting the benefits of travelling to visit Snowdonia by train and not by car. In all these areas, we're going to go much further. Our external efficiency has been good, but we're driving up our internal efficiency as well, with the PV on the roof at Boston Lodge being perhaps the first really big project to that end. The most important aspect of all with people is how we behave to each other. We didn't say enough about that in the Sustainable Railway, and we rectified the omission later on by publishing the separate Values and Behaviours booklet. That is now integrated into the Regenerative Railway, and it is a central part of the Regenerative Railway. And I can't really emphasise this too much, because at the end of the day, it's by your deeds that ye shall be known. That's quite an ancient saying. And for many of our supporters now are becoming just as interested in how we carry out our activities as what we aim to do. This is quite a brief tour, and I can't possibly go through all the projects which we've listed in the Regenerative Railway, but I would just like to touch on a few. At Boston Lodge, we have done a great deal under the Sustainable Railway, but there's a great deal more to do. The whole of the central area of the site hopefully will be undertaken and completed as part of the National Lottery-backed scheme. At Dinas, well, Dinas at the moment is an area where is an inordinate amount of faffing about in trying to prepare and put away trains. Both that will be sorted, but also much more better facilities for looking after those trains. At Bethgelert and at Tanabulk, we're hoping to make major improvements to the stations, because whereas for a long time our intermediate stations didn't really attract much traffic, since COVID they've become terribly important. And I suppose the last one I'd particularly like to touch on is electric locos. We did think we were going to build a fleet of new diesel locos. I'm rather glad we didn't actually, because this now gives us an opportunity to provide for our works trains and backup power in a very much more green and environmentally sustainable way. So this is the Regenerative Railway. It's not a revolution, but an evolution. It aims to build on the successes of the last 11 years and to take them a whole large step further. And it might seem a long shot, but I rather hope that in another 11 years, we'll be able to look back at the Regenerative Railway and say that we delivered not just on projects and other things, but also on leaving the railway in a more sustainable, more regenerative position and fit to take on the challenges of our third century of operation. Thank you.